The battle for Brest. The troops that manned the defenses at Brest followed this pattern. The 353rd VG Division that held positions east of Brest was a static division. The 266th VG, referred to earlier, was also a static division that started without especially good equipment and must have lost most of it before its disorganized remnants reached Brest. There were also substantial numbers of Luftwaffe anti-aircraft gunners and naval coast artillerymen. Other troops had been guards at various installations or worked at non-combat jobs in depots and headquarters. All told, the Brest garrison was about 40,000 strong. What made the garrison formidable was the all-volunteer 2nd Parachute Division commanded by Major General Hermann Bernhard Ramke. At the beginning of the campaign, the garrison commander had been Major General Erwin Rausch of the 343rd VG Division. Ramke's troops had been ordered to Normandy, but when the American advance cut him off, Ramke retreated to Brest and became the garrison commander. He was a fanatical Nazi and almost the caricature of a glory hound. But otherwise, he was a good commander and conducted himself with due regard for the rules of land warfare. He had also trained his division well, using it to stiffen his other units by assigning a few of his men to strong points to encourage the other men in the garrison. He also made a persuasive case that every bomb that fell on their positions was one that did not fall on their families at home. The argument and the example of the parachutists helped sustain the morale of the garrison until near the end of the campaign. The troops were in strongly fortified positions. The Germans had started improving the French fortifications almost as soon as they occupied the city. They began with a belt of fortifications close to the city and naval base to protect them from a raid like the one the British and Canadians had made at Dieppe. Since the Normandy invasion, the pace of fortification building had speeded up, and the emphasis had shifted to building an outer ring of positions designed to give depth to the defense. The inner perimeter consisted of well-dug trenches interspersed with concrete pillboxes and larger blockhouses. There were extensive minefields and barbed wire. All of this was arrayed in depth, so that when a position was under attack, the attackers could often be taken under fire by another. The outer belt of defenses turned almost every village into a strong point, with several automatic weapons and at least one anti-tank gun. The Germans made a determined effort to hold the outer belt and not be forced into the restricted area of the inner belt. This cost them so many casualties that they could have used many more men to adequately man the inner belt. The geography of the area also had a profound impact on the battle. The countryside close to Brest slopes gently down toward the port. Inland is a plateau with small hills and ridges, and there are several hills that are large enough to provide good observation points for artillery spotters. These became crucial ground for defenders and attackers alike. There were hedgerows surrounding many of the fields as in Normandy, but the fields are larger, so the hedgerows provide less cover for attackers. In Normandy, the US Army had learned painful lessons about how to deal with hedgerows that had to be unlearned here. The Rhino tanks and other hedgerow-busting devices were still useful, but the tactics that placed machine guns and tanks in the forefront of the battle were out of place here. Those weapons needed to support the frontline infantry from further back, away from German forward observers and anti-tank weapons. That otherwise open country was cut by deep ravines that compartmentalized the battle. The Penfield River had cut the deepest channel and separated Brest proper from its suburb, Recouvrance, to the west. The most striking feature of the area is that Brest Harbor is protected by two peninsulas. Across the Elorn River that flows into the harbor to the east of the city is the Daulos Peninsula that looks across the harbor at the Brest waterfront and the city on the rising slope behind it. The Crozon Peninsula lies further south and extends past the west end of the German perimeter. Middleton's first major move was to clear his flanks. He formed Task Force B, consisting of the 2nd Infantry Division's 38th Infantry with attachments, to attack down the Daulos Peninsula. The move deprived the Germans of the ability to fire into the flank of troops moving against the defenses on the west side of the Elorn or counterattack from the peninsula.
The center of the German defenses in the peninsula and the best observation site was Hill 154. It was strongly fortified with concrete pillboxes, trenches, barbed wire, and minefields. The defenders were armed with 25 machine guns, anti-tank guns, and some mortars. On August 22nd, the 38th advanced down the peninsula for several miles until they were stopped by fire from the hill and artillery from across the Alorne. On the 23rd, they launched a battalion-sized assault with artillery and tank destroyers firing in support. The Americans kept heavy fire on the hill to keep the Germans pinned down while they enveloped the position.
A German prisoner later remarked that the battalion had used cover and concealment very well, but only part of the hill was captured on the 22nd. That night, the Germans tried unsuccessfully to infiltrate men into the space between the two forward companies. The crisis in the fight came the next day. The Yanks were pinned down by fire from a pillbox. Staff Sergeant Alvin P. Carey was on the flank of the American force leading a heavy machine gun section and had armed himself with grenades before crawling forward. He killed a German and continued toward the pillbox. Although wounded, Carey crawled to within grenade-throwing range. After several tries, he succeeded in throwing a grenade through an aperture, putting the pillbox out of action. He died before his comrades could reach him, but his sacrifice allowed the Americans to move forward and complete the capture of the hill. He was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously. The Americans marveled at the view from the captured hill. They moved the battalion's 57mm anti-tank guns onto it and used them to provide direct fire in support of the advancing companies. As they moved down the peninsula, the Germans blew the bridge over the Elorn, which had allowed them to shift troops rapidly from one side of the river to the other. By the end of the month, Task Force B had cleared the peninsula and taken 2,700 prisoners. Middleton was now in position to seriously impede movement in downtown Brest. He moved a corps artillery group to the peninsula and put his own observers on Hill 154 to direct fire into the German rear. To provide security and to place direct fire into those streets, he formed a provisional battalion of 57 machine guns, 12 tank destroyers, and 8 40mm Bofors guns. On the other flank, Middleton directed Gerhardt be captured German positions west of the city. He formed several small task forces as the main body of the 29th began the attack on Brest. At first, there were 2 Ranger battalions, the 2nd and 5th, that were attached to the 29th. Platoon and company-sized units captured a number of German positions, usually from much larger garrisons. As the battle unfolded and it became clear that the Germans were much stronger than originally thought, the task forces were reinforced, consolidated, and designated Task Force S. Task Force S was initially commanded by the Division Chief of Staff, who was replaced by the Assistant Commander of the 29th Division, Colonel Leroy Watson. TFS was tasked with the ultimate objective of the Le Conquet Peninsula at the tip of Brittany, site of Battery Graf Spee with 4 280mm guns. 3 of the guns could be rotated to fire on the troops attacking Brest and did considerable damage. Gerhardt was always a difficult man to deal with, and having 11-inch shells falling around his headquarters made him decidedly irascible, especially when it was discovered that the Germans learned its location from a captured field order. Gerhardt's response was to give a battery of 155mm guns the task of silencing the German guns. The 155s were allotted plenty of ammunition, and their fire slowed the German cannonade. An attempt to move into the Le Conquet Peninsula to capture Battery Graf Spee showed that there were just too few Rangers for the job. Gerhardt finally allocated TFS an infantry battalion. On September 6th, the combined force, now with plenty of support, moved out. By the 9th, they had broken into the peninsula, and the Rangers were left to capture the last few German positions, including the Battery Graf Spee. The Rangers wanted those positions to surrender, and the best way to do that was to locate the German commander and get him to give the surrender order. A 4-man patrol under First Lieutenant Robert Edlin approached a German position that turned out to be a pillbox guarding an observation post or fire control center. It was unguarded, and the Germans there were eager to give up.
One of them volunteered to take Edlin to the peninsula's overall commander, a lieutenant colonel first. Taking one of his men with him, Edlin followed the prisoner to battery headquarters and burst into First's office, demanding that he surrender. Even with guns pointed at him, First tried to bluster by pointing out that there were only 2 Americans in a building full of 800 Germans. Edlin pulled the pin from a grenade and held it to First's chest. The look in Edlin's eyes must have been so convincing that he surrendered, and that part of the battle for Brest was over. Meanwhile, by August 25, all was in readiness for the main attack on Brest. All 3 divisions were in contact with the German outpost line. What seemed a reasonable supply of artillery ammunition was on hand, although not as much as Middleton wanted, and the artillery soon would be supplemented with tank destroyers, air attacks, and fire from naval vessels. The preparatory fires made little impact, and though well coordinated, the ground attack went nowhere. After more bombing, the attack resumed on the 26th, and there was still little progress. It became clear that the garrison was larger than originally thought. Eventually, the Yanks realized that there were 75 major German strongpoints, and that this would be a tough fight. Instead of a coordinated move by the 3 divisions at the direction of the Corps headquarters, the divisions and each of their regiments needed to carefully probe and study the German dispositions to find weak spots, then make detailed plans and carefully execute local attacks that overcame German positions one by one. This phase of the battle lasted until September 7th and resulted in piecemeal gains that gradually improved the American position.
The main targets of the divisional attacks were the hills and the outer ring of fortifications that were such good observation points. The first of them to fall was Hill 105, southwest of Gypavas, in the 2nd Division sector. Later attacks put the 2nd within reach of Hill 92, the other critical terrain feature in its sector. When the Germans retired from Hill 105, it gave Stroh's 8th Infantry Division the opportunity to capture another fortified hill in their sector, Hill 103. It proved to be a tough nut to crack. The Germans had covered it with entrenchments and bunkers. At one point, Gerhardt reported, "We are on it, but so are the Jerries." The slow progress frustrated Middleton. The attacks would have moved faster had higher headquarters realized the size of the garrison, the number of strong points to be overcome, and the challenges facing the attackers. Dismayed by the lack of progress in the center of his 29th Division sector, Gerhardt elected to shift troops from that area toward the sea. Given the amount and accuracy of the German artillery, the move needed to be made at night, although the area had not been reconnoitered. Gerhardt had a lot of respect for his men's ability. The troops would move west, pivot south, then east. The move succeeded in repositioning his troops, but their attack bogged down in a complex of hedgerows as tall as any in Normandy. The battle was also slowed by shortages of artillery ammunition. General Eisenhower intervened to raise Middleton's ammunition and air support priority. The services of supply took advantage of Brest being a coastal city to load ammunition trucks into LSTs and land them on the beaches of Brittany. Ike requested the 9th Air Force to support the operation with all the aircraft it could effectively use. He also had 8th Corps transferred to Simpson's 9th Army, which at that time had no other combat functions, so its headquarters could work to alleviate supply bottlenecks. By September 7th, there was enough ammunition on hand, and the local attacks had improved the Allied position sufficiently for the general attack to resume without having to restrict the artillery fires. On September 8th, the general attack resumed with considerably more success. The 2nd Division took the strongly fortified positions on Hill 92, which opened the way for the 8th Division to move several hundred yards forward toward Hill 82. The 29th finally cleared Hill 103 and took an important strong point near Kirgonant. There is no record of how many casualties were inflicted on the Germans during this phase of the fight, but the Americans captured 1,000 men for 250 casualties of their own. The 29th's capture of Hill 103 did not end the fighting on the hill. The Germans made strenuous efforts to recapture it, but the Americans made good use of the German trenches. What broke the back of the German attack was a battalion of 4.2-inch mortars that had been put in direct support of the men on Hill 103. It plastered the attackers with high volumes of highly accurate fire. Another source of fire support that was extremely valuable was bombing by sections of 4 and sometimes 8 P-47s that were usually overhead during daylight hours. When a German strongpoint was located,
The commander on the ground could request air support, and it was usually there within 45 minutes. After the target for the airmen was identified, the pilots could usually put their 500 or 1,000-pound bombs on the target. Once the commanding hills were captured, the battle took a better turn. The troops now had direct observation of all the German-controlled area. The German perimeter had shrunk, allowing the Americans to concentrate their combat power. Perhaps as important, it was now clear that the Germans were losing and their morale began to crack. While this was going on, 8 LSTs and 2 trains carrying ammunition arrived, which removed any ammunition constraints. The next day, the 2nd and 8th Divisions entered the old walled city and 2,500 prisoners were taken. The successes on the 9th gave rise to hopes that the battle was nearly over, but instead it was moving into its most ugly stage, house-to-house fighting. Fire from well-concealed positions made using the streets city suicidal for the infantry and armor alike. Instead, in a preview to what the 1st Infantry Division would experience in Bloody Aachen, the 2nd conducted what General Robertson called a corporal's war. The troops would blow a hole on the top floor of a German-occupied house, enter the building, and work downwards behind a shower of grenades and satchel charges. This would continue through the next house to the end of the block. On many street corners, the Germans had built reinforced concrete dugouts with street-level openings for heavy machine guns. The standard tactic was to detour around behind them, eliminating any resistance encountered in the process until the attackers were close enough for a flamethrower to make the position indefensible. It was a brutal, exhausting fight. The 2nd had a large area to clear, so the 8th reached the old walled city first. The 3 divisions were converging on Brest and the field was getting crowded. The Germans still held the Crozon Peninsula, so the 8th was pinched out and its sector was divided between the other 2 divisions along the line of the Penfield River. The 8th relieved a cavalry squadron screening the base of the peninsula and began moving down it. As the 2nd moved through the streets of town, the 29th was facing a different fight. Their area of operations was less built up, but it contained several old French forts, including Forts Querahu and Fort Montbarret. Querahu was the target of a battalion of the 175th Infantry Regiment that fought for 3 days to clear the outer works and approach the fort. The defense began to unravel on the 13th when Staff Sergeant Sherwood Hallman leaped over a hedgerow and wiped out a machine gun position with grenades and his rifle. After he killed the crew, 12 other Germans nearby surrendered, and another 75 followed their example. Hallman received the Medal of Honor. This opened the way for the whole battalion to move 2,000 yards behind a smokescreen to the fort while it was being bombarded by artillery and aircraft. By the time the 100-man garrison surrendered, the main part of the fort was unrecognizable.
Fort Montbarret was also a difficult objective. Its earth-filled masonry wall was 25 feet thick and was surrounded by a 50-foot wide dry moat. There were about 150 men garrisoning the fort proper, and more manning outlying positions who covered a minefield containing 300-pound shells for naval guns equipped with pressure igniters. Just getting to the fort seemed impossible, but the Corps engineer had secured the aid of a British squadron of 15 flame-throwing crocodile tanks. The plan was for the tanks to scorch the firing positions on the fort's outer wall, while artillery encouraged the defenders to keep their heads down. Under the cover of a smoke screen, engineers then cleared a path for the attackers through the minefield. After 3 tanks were put out of action, the bombardment was resumed. The engineers worked through the night to improve the path through the mines, while the crocodiles moved up close to the fort and the artillery hit it hard again. More smoke was placed on the fort and the crocs moved forward, flaming the firing apertures. The flames kept the Germans back while the engineers placed 2,500 pounds of explosives at the base of the wall. While this was taking place, tank destroyers and the regimental cannon company were brought to within 200 yards of the fort and began firing at its gate. The result was a breached gate and wall. The stunned garrison, including General Roche, surrendered. This opened the way into recouvrance, and before the day was done, patrols were over its wall. Resistance collapsed. The same day, the 2nd found an unguarded railroad tunnel through the Brest city wall and swept down to the waterfront. The Rangers then captured the remaining forts, and the fight for the city was over. The American casualties were about 6,500. 38,000 Germans were captured. This was the most grueling battle the U.S. Army had yet fought in the European theater. It would hardly be the last. But in all of them, the Army displayed tenacity and an ability to improvise and adapt that helped keep their casualties well below what they could have been.
More important was the impressive support they received from non-divisional units that supplemented the artillery and anti-tank weapons organic to the divisions. Without the tank destroyer, artillery, and air support, much more of the weight of the fighting would have fallen on the infantry, and the casualties would have been much heavier. One has only to look at the ruinous German casualties at Stalingrad to see the impact of receiving only the much more modest support available to German infantry. Dr. Weintraub's conclusion that American divisions were too lightly armed for grueling battles probably would have been correct had it not been for the impressive kinds and amounts of support they received from these non-divisional supporting units. Still, it was clear that fire support could not win the battle without the valor of men like Sergeant Smith, Carey, and Hallman, and Lieutenant Edlin, and the daring and impressive technical skills displayed by the men clearing the minefields and manning the crocodiles at Fort Montbury.